In 1884, a family of German immigrants to Providence, Albert and Alice Sack, and their sons, Albert Jr. and George, built a home at 245 Hope Street on the east side of Providence. It was a stately home with a covered walkway for an entrance, 3 grand floors, arched windows, many chimneys, and 2 different driveways across an expansive lawn. In 1939, the house was demolished, and for 75 years, the remains of the house waited silently underground as Moses Brown students walked and played soccer on the empty field above. But starting in 2015, the house would sit silently no longer. The Archaeology of College Hill, an archaeology field course for Brown undergraduates, opened excavations at the Sack House site in the fall of 2015. Today, in 2018, 3 years of digging have given us a good idea of where the Sack House was located, what materials it was constructed of, what household goods it contained, and what life in turn-of-the-century Providence may have looked like. Of course, archaeology is an interpretive sport, and every artifact pulled out of the ground asks more questions than it answers. How did the Sacks engage with their German heritage while assimilating in America? How did the Sacks' class and race affect their daily life? What, exactly, did the family eat? Where did they throw their trash? And who cleaned their floors? But with each question asked, we learn to think more critically about the Sacks in their time, and about us in our time.
A typical day on site looks like all of us show up to the site around 3 on Wednesdays. That's our dig time. We sort of divide it up among the 3 trenches. Usually trench 7 was the larger trench, so it gets more people. We have to take starting elevations at all of the corners of the square, and then also at the center to sort of see how much we are digging through, and also to measure how thick our contexts are. And then we use trowels to sort of scrape off a couple centimeters at a time, working in parallel rows. And then we take the dirt that has been sifted, we take the dirt that has been troweled off, and we take it over to the sifters. Someone will sift the dirt and look for any interesting artifacts. A lot of times we'd find nails or porcelain pieces, tile, brick. Trench 8 had a lot of asphalt, which was kind of interesting and very hard to distinguish from a rock. And then once the artifacts were found, we would take them back to the trenches, and we had different bags per context. So, there'd be context 3 bag for wood, and we would put all of the wood pieces that we found in there. And we would also mark it down on the context sheet so that we had sort of a running inventory of all of the artifacts that we'd found.
All right, so here we've got our kind of constructed brick feature, which is one of our more interesting finds. You can see that it's kind of constructed of these little chambers, which I'll explain in a bit. We excavated one. And through the course of the season, we learned that this was an interior part of the house, which you can see through this brick feature abutting the foundation wall right over here all along this side. And what really helped us kind of figure out what this really strangely shaped thing was when he emptied out one of these little chambers, which we see here, and found that rather than being a wall that was filled, it was a kind of intentionally open space. Our best guess is that this was a fuel storage area, likely for wood for the fireplace that existed above this structure. We suspect that it was a wood storage area because there's not really any staining from the walls, which we'd expect if coal had been kept there. And it's not part of the fireplace itself because we'd also see some darkening of the surrounding bricks if there had been flames inside of this area. So our bottom of this little chamber is likely the same level of the basement floor. And you can come down into the basement of the house, access your wood storage here, take it up to the fireplace above. This is an entirely interior space of the house, so we're unlikely to find any foundation walls like we have in our other two trenches. Nevertheless, this trench had a lot of really interesting finds in a sense of that, especially since they were stacked on top of each other and kind of sequentially, is that when they demolished the house, they ripped out the driveway or sidewalk, whatever was kind of nearby on the other side of the exterior wall to the north, and just kind of dumped it in the basement so they could fill up that space and create a nice level plane for Moses Brown after the house was gone. So even when you're not finding intact architecture, looking at these kind of destruction materials and how they found their way into the site is a great way to build more knowledge even of individual events like the destruction of the house.
I dug at the wall at Trench 9, and we had thought that we had found the bottom of the wall because we had dug to a certain depth on the outside where it was mostly sand and a lot easier to dig, and someone had stuck a trowel sort of under the wall, what they thought was under the wall, but it turned out to just be sort of a loose piece of mortar, so we got confused and we got tricked. So we kept digging there on the very last day to just sort of double check, and we realized that the wall extended down a lot farther than we previously thought. So we moved back to the inside of the house where it was a mortar and brick mixture and started digging there with a shovel just sort of straight down to see if we could hit the actual floor.
And I was like, wow, there's this really hard piece of ground right here. What is it? And she's like, oh no, you're just weak. Like, you're just not digging hard enough. Let me try. And then she goes and she's like, oh no, that's pretty hard. And I was like, I told you so. And then what we ended up finding was the basement floor, I guess. So that was really exciting and I felt so validated.
So basically the first thing we do is verify that we have everything that we're supposed to have. So as we're doing the digging process, we have to write down everything we find, put it in specific bags, and document how many of each artifact we have. So basically the first day after digging, we're just okay, this is all the mess we found throughout the semester, let's make some sense of it. So we basically go through, count everything, and we basically categorize different artifacts into different ways of cleaning. So things like tiles and pottery and brick that are more substantial and that can basically survive water. We will clean them with a wet brush, basically trying to get as much of the original material to show as possible. For things like nails, we'll use a wire brush because obviously we don't want them to rust more than they already have. Other things are too delicate whatsoever, so maybe we'll do a tiny bit of scraping with a wire brush or a soft brush without any water, but usually we just work with what we got out of fear of destroying it more. And then once we've cleaned it as much as we can, we make sure that we have good photos of everything, from all of the contexts, making sure that everything is documented well. And then from there we basically look at all of our finds and see if any of them have any extra hints of what they could be from. There was one tile that had a maker's mark that basically indicated what company it was from, and also that maker's mark or the impression only went into effect at a certain year. So you basically had, this is the earliest date that this tile could have been made, and that was really interesting. And we found that about a few different tiles, some bricks. There was a Gansett can that was matched pretty, I think, to the year of basically where it could have been from, and I think it was one of the first types of cans, which is really interesting. So yeah, basically we found all this stuff and we just want to make some sense of it.
with the grad student from the course, we took a GPS and we were able to take data points. You can see them here on the map. We have them at the corners of each of the trenches and see the corners of this wall. So I was able to use those points to basically create these polygons for the trenches. And based off of that, we now have the data that we needed to do some basic analysis and figure out basically where we were on the site. So the coolest thing was when I was able to geo-reference the 1908 historical map and look at the data points that we took from the survey, and just the first time that this wall showed up exactly right on the plan was just amazing. And it felt like really fulfilling, and like the fact that they're actually going to use these results is really awesome.
Well, it's funny actually. The artifacts, your perception of exciting, of course, changed a lot over time. When we first started, we found little bits of brick, and we were super excited. The little tiny chunks, maybe less than a centimeter in length, and that was amazing. Our first nail was amazing. By the end, though, of course, we're finding more bricks than we know what to do with. Tons of full-size bricks. We're just throwing them out like they're trash. So I guess that stuff, seemed interesting at first, but I guess definitely what interested me most was the bone finds. I thought the bones were was kind of neat. Not human bones, of course, in case people watching this video are thinking, but the animal bones, a lot of times in the past, there were no dump trucks, no trash trucks to come around, pick up your whatever refuse you had from dinner, so oftentimes it's just deposited out behind the house. So the most interesting thing was definitely being able to go back and see what kind of diet, what kind of things this Sack family ate.
We found a few dozen pieces of bone on the site, and I used those for my final project. So I went and talked to a zooarchaeologist or an osteoarchaeologist to look at the bones that we found. Catherine Bunsen, who works in Tchaikovsky and also is an associate professor in IBIS. And she has sort of she has just these boxes of, one box is cow bones that she got from some rancher, and one box is rat bones that she got off of a different archaeologist, and so she just has all these boxes for comparison. So I brought in the bones that we had, and we would, hold up a big piece of bone that we found and say, oh, it's probably cow or it might be deer, and sort of compare the bones to see what animal it was from.
You just become more cognizant of what you're leaving behind, in a sense. We did an exercise in class one day where we basically got someone's trash and we were looking through it to see who this person was. So basically it makes you think more of the material you use, that's what's gonna be left. And that's really interesting. I don't know if it's gonna change how I live my life, but it's definitely an interesting way of thinking that I don't think I have.